This weekend, England take on Scotland in the world's greatest trophy that has an elephant on it. The Calcutta Cup heads to Murrayfield. England looking to go 3 from 3 in the Six Nations, keeping Grand Slam hopes alive. And Scotland looking to keep up an incredible record in the most important game of their year. And in order to preview this, right, we headed into the brand new Squidge Rugby studio that we've got in the corner of the office now and decided to look over in a brand new format for the channel, previewing the game, sort of not brand new because we sort of did this in the World Cup, going over what may happen, what tactics may come, the team selection, and first, that incredible record Scotland currently have over England.
Well, because the interesting thing about this game, right, the interesting thing about this as a fixture is that for years, England completely dominated it. It was a real issue for Scotland. Scotland won under Gregor Townsend in 2017, that huge win at Murrayfield. And from there on out, basically they've dominated this game. They had the one loss at Murrayfield in 2020. That's the only time they've lost since then.
It's Gregor's one thing that he always has. He beats England, then gets a new contract.
But this has been the kind of history of it, hasn't it? It's the way it's grown. This is Scotland's one big game, right? And I know this year, Steve Borthwick is very, very much targeting this game because of that hoodoo that's now built up. Because it's now become a thing that Scotland always beat England.
Yeah. They're suddenly England's bogey team, aren't they?
Yeah. And yet we look at the Six Nations so far, and both teams are in weird places. It's really hard to say, because England are very much like Wales in transitional block, like Italy as well. They're transitioning into something new. Scotland, on the other hand, they're very much continuing as they were before the World Cup. We don't know if this is a team that's past their peak, whether this is a team that's on the final ascent to their peak, or whether this is a team that's just plateauing, which is perhaps where my gut instinct is.
It's really hard to tell for both of them, isn't it?
Yeah.
So many people are looking at England and branding it as like, oh, they're not playing that well. They're only scraping past Wales. They're only scraping past Italy. But this is what they did in the World Cup.
Yeah.
They squeaked past teams that people thought they were going to beat convincingly. And people think that means that they're playing badly.
Yeah.
But it's a winning strategy.
Well, this is the thing, right? So this is the thing I think is interesting about Steve Borthwick's England in particular, is if I was to define Steve Borthwick as a coach, as a rugby man, I think his key defining feature as a coach is that he is a problem solver. He is a guy who is presented with an issue and he resolves it, right? So we saw it all throughout the World Cup. I mean, the warm-ups, they looked pretty bad. The Six Nations didn't look great. Clearly his approach would be need to be the fittest team in this World Cup. So they were probably up there with South Africa's the best conditioned. And we saw them continuing to build on that, the way they built their kicking game out. And then perhaps most interestingly, I think this Italy game this year, first game of the Six Nations, they had no idea what they were going to face because they knew that Gonzalo Quesada coming in was going to play very differently to what we've seen Kieran Crowley's Italy. They didn't know how it was going to be different. They knew if they were going to kick more, they didn't know how they were going to kick.
I think a lot of us probably assumed that Italy were going to kick longer rather than going contestable. So I think that was a little bit of a shock to England's system. And yet, you mentioned problem solving. Second half, literally start the second half. Instead, they're dropping back Tommy Freeman. He's leaping into the air and stealing those balls off Italy. They completely dealt with Italy's kicking game. No real issue. Won the game. Deservedly so.
So to kind of pick up on one particular clip, right? Off a scrum, instantly, right? They go to Henry Slade, who kicks long into the corner, looks to trap Italy, looks to trap Parney in the corner, kicks it back. Henry Slade then drops back and bombs it back. We then, set into a sequence of phases. Varney puts it out on the full, looking for touch to clear because he's in 22. And from there, England hang the high ball off Danny Kerr. And what they've done is they've really varied very sensibly their kicking game. And after each kick England put in, Italy start to change their backfield. So they're going, okay, England are kicking long, we're going to leave someone back and look long. Suddenly, Ioane's waiting so far back in his own 22, he's not there set for when Kerr hangs a contestable kick instead. I automatically said Ben Young's there because it's an England scrum half. I just slipped back into it.
So they're just nibbling away at Italy in the way that they're kicking, knowing they're not going to pin us back on our own 5 metre. Let's just slightly push them very slightly further back until eventually they bomb it.
So this is the interesting thing, I think, the England team selection for this week, right?
Yes.
Because there is one big headline in this team, and it is, at fullback, our good friend, your friend and mine, Lieutenant Furbank.
It's super exciting to see him back, first and foremost. I'm delighted to see him. I'm delighted to see his moustache. But above all, that feels like an extremely horses for courses situation. Again, going back to your thing about problem solving, right? Obviously, the headline is Freddie Stewart has been dropped after a fantastic performance against Wales.
Yeah.
Because he was brilliant. He always is brilliant. He's brilliant in the air. It's what Freddie Stewart does best. But what that says to me, and I'm going to ask what it says to you in a moment, but what it says to me is he knows Finn Russell's not going to be sticking the ball in the air all day long. He's going to be sticking it long. The flip side of that then becomes, you see George Furbank's named at fullback rather than Freddie Stewart. Do you suddenly change your kicking tactics on the fly if you're Scotland? So there's two sides to this.
So do you know who the top 5 players that kick the most in this year's Six Nations are?
Tomo Ramos.
Ramos is number 5.
Okay, Finn Russell.
Finn Russell is number 1.
Mathieu Jalibert.
Jalibert is number 10, joint with Jack Crowley in number 10.
Maxime Luku.
Maxime Luku is number 9.
James Lowe.
James Lowe is number 4.
Okay. Oh, what
Come
other
on, you can
Rugby
fill out
players
the rest
are
of
there?
it.
Dan Sheehan. No.
Dan, the top 3 are all relevant to this game that we're talking about.
Okay, hit me. Ben White.
Ben White is number 2, and Alex Mitchell is number 3.
I see.
Right. So, number 1 and 2 are the Scottish halfbacks. Finn Russell and Ben White. Finn Russell is kicking about 3 times as often as any other fly half in this tournament.
Wow.
So what we're seeing is Scotland are kicking the ball more than anyone else. This year, they have kicked more contestable than they have in past years, where they've generally kicked long. This year, we have seen Ben White hang a lot of contestable box kicks. A lot of that, I think, was to specifically target France, and because of who they had first up. But we saw against Wales, Ben White, I thought was exceptional. I thought it was the best player in the park against Wales.
Yeah.
And Wainwright got it because, him and Tommy Raffle were both brilliant. I thought Ben White, that first half, was unbelievable.
Agreed.
And we've seen him kick exceptionally well, which is changing slightly how Scotland are playing. So Scotland have essentially got 2 different kicking strategies happening at once. 1 off 9, 1 off 10. They're kicking long off 10 and they're kicking shallow off 9, off Ben White.
So my question around that is, Freddie Stewart, his main thing is, people often ask why they're kicking to Stewart all the time, whereas in fact, it's Stewart is instead positioning himself where the kick is about to come in. So do you reckon Furbank has that, or do you think maybe the likes of Freeman are going to be the people who are constantly swapping, managing the entire back 3, I think they're kicking off 9, I'm getting into that position, I'm taking this ball?
I think this is it, right? You look at the England team, it is stacked with really good kickers. Furbank obviously played a bunch of rugby at fullback. You have George Ford, obviously, you have Danny Caring, a scrum half as well. And then you have the really key ones, I think, are Elliot Daly on the wing, who kicks a fair amount, not as often as Lowe does for Ireland, not as often as Irish wingers, but they're getting up there. And then, of course, Henry Slade, a 13, who England are using more and more as a kicking option.
Both Slade and Daly left-footed options as well.
Yeah.
Both have massive left boots on them. Slade actually has been kicking off both in the Six Nations so far.
So England have 6 players who are really key kickers across their team in the game so far. And obviously they then really, I think, they found a way to balance that back line. And I think what you've got in this team, right, is a lot of different styles of kicking. So same as that Italy clip I just showed, where the thing they do isn't they go, well, Italy are kicking this way, so we need to change our kicking and go in this way. What they do is they go, oh, Italy are kicking like this. What we need to do is vary our kicking constantly to catch them out. So they did. So they changed up what was a very decisive kicking strategy in the first half, where they were kicking consistently, in the same way. And they went, instead, we're going to kick differently every time, and we're going to catch Italy out. And suddenly they're making major yardage, and Italy aren't able to cover the backfield appropriately because they can't kind of initiate any duels, and they can't cover the high ball properly, and it became a real issue for them. A big part of them going for Furbank at 15 for me is them wanting to vary their kicking game more and have more kickers in their backfield. Because Freddie Stewart is a perfectly decent kicker, but George Furbank is a former fly half.
Yeah.
He, for me, is an out-and-out fullback, but he is someone that can play fly half, that can slot in as a kicking option more often. Do you know which team kicks the most of any club side in Europe?
Is it Northampton Saints?
It is indeed Northampton Saints.
I wouldn't have guessed that if you didn't train.
Yeah, if I didn't, I led into that. The interesting thing about the kicking trends across the European leagues, just because I fell into this rabbit hole, you go back a year or so, right, and the team that kicked more won, I think, 80% of games.
Okay.
That's not the case anymore, but the teams that are overperforming expectations are the ones that kick most. So no one expected Northampton to be top of the Premiership. No one expected the Ospreys to be in the top 8, more than halfway through the season. No one expected Cass to be in the top 4, the top 14, more than halfway through the season. Those are the sides that are kicking most often.
So let's talk about Scotland.
Yes. So Scotland, right, are the team that kicks the most in the Six Nations, and who knows how that's going?
Yeah, because I think it's fair to say it's mixed results so far. It's 2 results which are on a knife edge, like could have gone either way.
Yeah.
Barring, one or two decisions in each game. One of them came down to, obviously there's the decision, but as we discussed in the previous video, the game management in the last 10 minutes not going in Scotland's favour, and the other one going into Scotland nailed the game management in the last 10 minutes of the Wales game. Suddenly they switched on. Finn Russell constantly just pumping the ball onto the 5 metre line of Wales, forcing Johan Lloyd to just kick long, not actually think about anywhere where he's actually trying to land the ball, just get as long as he can, and then eventually can win it, having to concede the ball to Scotland just because he didn't want to waste any more time. Scotland only had like 3 or 4 minutes to run down left on the clock at that point.
Yeah.
And Finn played an absolute blinder in that game in terms of actually closing that out. And it just makes you wonder where they are in terms of, because let's face it, this is going to be a close game.
Yeah.
It's probably going to end up with a situation where Finn Russell has to pull out some miraculous moment of game management, a moment of genius that is going to seal the game for Scotland.
What we're seeing in the Premiership, right, is a lot of teams kick roughly 30 metres, high 20s, 27 to 29 metres.
Per kick,
basically,
that is?
Per kick on average, right? The exceptions, so Exeter and Bristol tend to kick much longer than anyone else. So, again, we've got an extra player in at 13 to give them that long kicking option, right? Northampton kick more than anyone else, so we've got a Northampton player at full-back because they want to engage in kicking battles.
And they've lost one at 9.
Back. Yeah. And they know, right, Ben White, typically, when he's box-kicked, he's targeted positions where they've dropped Jalabert back, box-kicking. He kicked very little to Winnett and to Ramos. We've seen, him be much smarter in terms of when they're kicking and who they're kicking to. So they know they're going to try to avoid kicking to Stewart, and they can change their entire backfield. Or they can have Furbank in position to counter when Russell's kicking long. And he's there very much to counter one half of Scotland's kind of duology of kicking strategy, because how Scotland kick is so vital to how they attack.
Yeah, I think you've already made the point about Finn Russell, his game management and so on. I think a big part of that is the fact that he's not the only one managing the attack anymore.
Yeah.
But suddenly, especially now Stuart Hogg's retired, Sione Tuipulotu's really stepped up and has taken part in making sure he manages the game himself. So here off a maul, first phase, they've set up, Finn Russell's at 10, then they've got the Tuipulotu triangle, as we've previously coined it. So Tuipulotu's going in, he's actually going to receive the ball first with Hugh Jones running a hard line, and then Matt Fagerson's going to leave this maul and hit the breakdown as well.
Yeah.
So Finn Russell floats out the back, Tuipulotu just carries on this occasion. It's a really dominant carry. Costello has to chop him around the ankles, and Tompkins just has to come in and get him to the floor however he possibly can. It's a good enough carry that when Rafael goes over, Hugh Jones has beaten him to the ball. So Rafael isn't interested, he can't get his hands on the ball, and Hugh Jones has flopped just straight over the breakdown. At this point, Fagerson's come in and locked it down. The Welsh players are nowhere near to the Scottish ball. The Scottish ball is much quicker than the Welsh fold. So as a consequence of that, Sam Costello, having just made the chop, straight back to his feet, has to come up offside and give away a penalty in order to block the Scottish attack from actually going anywhere.
Yeah.
If he doesn't come up offside here, you'd assume Finn's going to take the ball to the line, get a dominant carry, offload to Richie Gray or vice versa, and you're probably getting a dominant attack, possibly a line break opportunity here. Ben O'Keefe sticks out his hand, it's a penalty advantage, Scotland kick the 3 from here. So again, similar position here. This is off structured phase play rather than a line out, so this is the 7th phase of the attack. They're set up quite normally here, so Finn is in the first receiver position, Tuipulotu's in a genuine second receiver position, and Hugh Jones is in the actual outside centre position. This is exactly how we'd expect a midfield to stack up, right? However, at the very last moment, whilst the ball is in the breakdown, Russell makes a call to Ben White, presumably just one word that means, give it to Sione instead of me. We've all seen in rugby before a mismatch where somebody pops up in midfield, let's say a winger against a prop, and they've found them and just go, let's skin them on the outside, let's really isolate them. Now, Finn Russell here has found a new way of making this mismatch by using this Tuipulotu triangle, right? So Leon Brown is marking him in midfield. Obviously, if Finn Russell goes and runs at him, he's tackling him. It's a short enough space that he's able to do that, right? So instead, what he decides to do is take out of the game Beard and Tompkins by getting Tuipulotu and Jones to run at them there. So the ball then comes out the back, and suddenly, as long as Costello has a bit of doubt in his mind about tackling Duan van der Merwe, he has got a straight sprint against Leon Brown in the defensive line. So when he gets the ball, Costello buys the dummy, and Leon Brown's in absolute no man's land there. Costello's too stressed by Duan van der Merwe running a great line, and he ends up scoring the try from there.
Yeah, it's an increasing trend. It's something Ireland are really good at in particular, is making the gap come to you.
Yes.
Rather than just attacking the gap. It's going, okay, there's space here, there's a mismatch here. How do we make it work for us on our terms instead of trying to attack the defence? Because defences close off space so quickly now and close off those opportunities so fast.
And that's it. Defenders deliberately will try and put someone like Leon Brown, who's not blessed with his speed.
Yeah.
They'll try and put him in a place where the gaps either side of him are not that big.
Yeah.
You can't just run straight at him because he will get you to ground.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you manage to manipulate the defence, make everyone else come off the line and put him in a position where he then has to cover a wide channel, as Finn Russell does there, you're going to score tries. You're going to find Duan van der Merwe in loads of space. So it's a brilliantly constructed try, and so much more of that goes on Sione Tuipulotu being able to step in as a first receiver, as an attack manager, rather than just Finn himself, allowing him to play wider.
But the interesting thing on that, right, is how England are defending now, which is they're very much under Felix Jones adopted the Springbok defensive system, where we are seeing them absolutely fly thunder off the line from those first 3 or 4 defenders out. So they're really flying up, using that kind of role we're very used to seeing Eben Etzebeth and Peter Steph-Toy do.
Yeah.
You've got Toje running that incredibly well. Leads the Ben Earl try, very much him thundering off the line completely. But they're also using the winger an awful lot, which I think also comes back into that kicking game, right? And we saw Freddie Stewart talked about this. Like, he's really enjoying the way Felix Jones got them defending, because he's never played like that before, where he is personally coming from putting pressure on the attack. Because there's so much emphasis on the fullback to fly out a line and fly up and kind of cut things off while someone floats in behind. They use
Covers
the 10.
a lot of ground, Freddie Stewart, doesn't he?
Yeah. They use the 10 to float into the backfield an awful lot as well, England now. The 10 kind of pendulums more than the winger, because the winger, the blindside winger and the 10, the players drop back really, because, the open side winger is such a key part of the defence. But I think that's something Scotland can look to exploit with kicking. It was how teams were generally getting round the Springboks in past, where they were kind of going 2 out and then cross-kicking. And I think, similarly, that's something we could see Scotland starting to do this weekend.
Alternatively, you've mentioned Finn Russell loves the cross-kick.
Yeah.
He's won them Calcutta Cups. Alternatively, another tactic that they might want to start doing, go for the cross-kick, and then the winger then dinks it in behind when it brings when it brings Furbank up into the line.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing I'd raise, if I was Scotland, right, I'd be looking to start putting cross kicks on Tuipulotu. He's a skillful enough player. You want to add that deception in. You run that Tuipulotu shape. You have Finn shipping it out the back to Tuipulotu, who can then drop it off into the corner.
It's a really good
He's
point.
skillful enough. He's good enough. Hugh Jones, likewise, is a perfectly good kicker. Can play fullback supposedly.
Bear in mind, last year, Calcutta Cup, Hugh Jones scored that try from
Exactly.
Tuipulotu putting in the grubber kick. And obviously it's a very different skill, and obviously that setup probably complements something like that more.
Yeah.
But you're right.
Or even Blair Kinghorn, 15.
Yeah, there you go. There does come a point eventually where Tuipulotu comes in at 10, and you probably know roughly what player they're going to run. Obviously, there's several variations of it, and it's one thing reading it, it's another thing defending it. But you're right. If that cross-field kick comes in, or potentially a longer ball over the top, like Geordie Barrett did in the Rugby World Cup final, when he was technically running that exact same shape, it does open Scotland's options up a lot more.
Yeah. Well, okay, so the one big call in the Scotland team, right? Carl Rowe, who's had a very good first 2 rounds, has been dropped in favour of Carl Steyn. If you were to tell me what's Carl Steyn's big standout attribute, I'd probably think for a moment. I'd think about having met Nelson Mandela when he was a kid, and then after that, when you start to fumble down the list, I think he's one of the best wingers in the world at taking cross kicks. So one of the things he's really good at is above his head, catching above his head. He's phenomenal at.
And defensively, he's so sound, isn't he?
Yeah.
You're not going to have many people get past him, But high ball, you're right. Even on opposition cross kicks, he's perfectly solid.
Also, Duan is massive.
He's quite big, isn't he?
He's big. He is bigger than me.
I think I agree with that.
Yeah.
And the last Calcutta Cup, he got man of the match.
Yep.
He scored 2 tries, including the 60-metre absolute worldie. With that in mind, is it possible to stop Duan van der Merwe?
Possible, yes. In the way that it's possible to stop global warming. I'm not going to back you. You need a global strategy that will take place over decades in order to stop him. But it is possible. Right.
So we just need to recycle more plastics.
We need to recycle all our plastics.
That is my main goal for rugby
Any
this year.
Scotland fan who threw a Coke bottle in just the black bin instead of the green bin, right, or the blue bin, depending on your area, This year in general, you've probably contributed to not scoring.
Are you trying to encourage Scottish people to pollute the planet?
I'm saying recycle. Do you see the state of the Edinburgh during the Fringe last year when they were all on strike? That's what we're looking at. They need to everyone needs to be recycling in order to stop Duan van der Merwe. But yeah, so I think the big question here, right, is who is this the bigger loss for if someone slips up? It's a negative way of asking the question, but I think it's more interesting who's it bigger win for, because it's a bigger win for Scotland, right? It always is. But if England lose this, it's officially like a drought against Scotland.
Yeah.
In 5 years.
I think, personally, it's a bigger loss for England.
I think so.
Because, A, you're right, there's the drought, there's the narrative against Scotland, there's Gregor's cheeky grin at the final whistle, there's Finn doing poses, there's all of that, right? But also, the whole selling point of Steve Borthwick's plan is he's winning games.
Yeah.
And English fans will be sick to death of losing to their closest local rival every year. And suddenly that's where people being cynical, and I don't agree with this at all, will be going like, oh, what's bloody Borthwick good for? He's meant to win these close games, you know, and Steve Borthwick's brilliant. He's done a great job so far.
Yeah.
But with all of that in mind, what he's doing is he's winning games.
Yeah.
So if he doesn't win this game, it is a bigger loss for England.
And yet, also, Scotland are further along in their development than England are, right? And they should be in a situation where they're winning these games against a rebooting England team all the time. And if they don't, you start to really question Gregor Townsend, what he's doing, his methods, the whole kit and caboodle.
Because there's so much on the Calcutta Cup in Gregor's mind, seemingly, you have to kind of think of this as a must-win game
Scotland
for Scotland.
are almost set up to be like a cup team, the equivalent of cup team in club rugby. Like, use more in football as a cliche.
Calcutta Cup team.
Yeah, exactly. But Scotland are set up, right? They're not going to be that consistent. They haven't been that consistent, but they consistently win their biggest game of the year.
Yeah.
You know, they consistently put in 1 or 2 huge performances. And they didn't do that in the World Cup, but they're due. They're due a huge game.
Devil's advocate, how big a loss is it if Scotland lose this streak, bar one game, but this streak that they have built up, this narrative around, we always beat England. How big is that for Scotland if they lose that?
That's the thing, isn't it? That's the worry. Like, do they drop off? Does that become a huge mental factor? Does it become a huge feature in next year's Netflix documentary? Where does it land? I don't know. It's a really exciting one. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it.
I can't wait. It's always one of my favourite games of the Six Nations, England-Scotland. It's just, the rivalry is one thing, but again, just the last couple of years, they've always been crackers, so I can't wait for this one.
Me neither. We'll see you very soon for rugby.
Rugby!